The sun was high, the asphalt radiated heat, and a quiet gas station suddenly became the stage for a moment that would ripple far beyond its cracked concrete. A black Navy officer stood frozen beside his car, dressed in spotless white uniform, metals reflecting light that felt almost accusatory. His hands were raised, not in fear, but in disbelief, as flashing lights painted his body red and blue. To anyone watching, it looked like another routine arrest. But beneath that stillness was a pressure building fast, because this moment wasn't routine at all. It was a collision of authority, race, and unchecked assumptions. And within minutes, forces far larger than a local police department would be watching closely, questioning everything that had just unfolded. Before this story continues, take a moment to share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Stories, where voices history tried to silence are finally heard. Commander Elijah Brooks had worn the uniform for over 20 years, yet each time he buttoned the immaculate white jacket of Navy dress whites, the weight felt heavier than fabric. It carried history. It carried responsibility. And for a black man in America, it carried a silent expectation to be perfect, calm, and invisible all at once. On that afternoon, he was traveling between bases, driving a government-issued vehicle clearly marked, stopping briefly for fuel before continuing his route. His posture was upright, his movements measured, his demeanor professional. Habits reinforced over decades of service in environments where mistakes could cost lives. Elijah's career was built on discipline. He had risen through ranks that were never designed with him in mind, navigating spaces where his competence was constantly questioned, his presence subtly challenged. He had learned early that excellence was not optional. It was survival. Each medal on his chest represented years of sacrifice, missed birthdays, deployments away from family, and moments when he had to swallow indignities in silence for the sake of mission and duty. The gas station sat just off a highway that cut through a town known more for passing traffic than for welcoming diversity. The buildings were faded, the sidewalks cracked, and the air carried the heavy stillness of a place that had not changed much in decades. Elijah stepped out of his vehicle calmly, his polished shoes touching the concrete with deliberate care. He was aware of his surroundings. Always, awareness had been ingrained in him long before the Navy. It was taught in whispers by elders, reinforced by news stories, and confirmed by personal experience. As he began refueling, a patrol car slowed nearby. Its presence wasn't unusual, but the lingering pause was. Elijah noticed it in his peripheral vision, the way the car stopped just a little too long, the way the officer inside watched instead of passing by. He kept his focus forward, refusing to let suspicion alter his posture. He had done nothing wrong. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. The officer eventually stepped out, his boots heavy against the pavement, his hand resting casually near his belt. The distance between them wasn't large, but it felt vast. Elijah felt a familiar tightening in his chest, not fear, but readiness. He had learned to prepare for moments like this, moments when identity overshadowed credentials, when assumptions took the wheel before facts could even enter the conversation. Elijah remained composed, standing straight, his uniform spotless. To him, this was not just clothing. It was proof of belonging, proof of service, proof of loyalty to a nation that often questioned his place within it. Yet he knew, painfully, that the uniform alone did not shield him from suspicion. History had taught him that. The officer's gaze lingered, scanning Elijah from head to toe, pausing briefly on the medals before drifting back to his face. There was no greeting, no introduction, just a question delivered with an edge that suggested the answer was already assumed. Elijah responded calmly, professionally, exactly as his training demanded. But calm did not soften the tension. It sharpened it. The air seemed to grow thicker with each passing second. The quiet of the gas station became oppressive. A few onlookers paused, sensing something unfolding. Elijah could feel the familiar internal calculation begin. How much to say, how little to move, how to remain respectful without surrendering dignity. This calculation was one he had made countless times before, both in uniform and out of it. What should have been a brief interaction stretched on, each moment adding weight to an encounter that was drifting rapidly off course. Elijah's heart remained steady, but his mind raced. He knew how quickly situations like this could escalate, how easily misinterpretation could turn deadly. He focused on breathing, on stillness, on projecting compliance without submission. The officer's posture shifted. Authority hardened into confrontation. And in that moment, Elijah realized this was no longer about a traffic stop or a routine check. This was something else entirely. Something older. Something deeply rooted. And it was about to spiral. The tension escalated quietly at first, like a storm forming beyond the horizon. The officer's voice grew firmer, his command sharper, his patience thinner. Elijah complied with every instruction, each movement deliberate, slow, almost ceremonial. His hands rose, palms open, fingers spread, not because he believed he was a threat, but because experience had taught him that perception mattered more than truth. Passers-by began to take notice. Phones were raised discreetly. Whispers passed between strangers. The image unfolding before them was jarring. A black man in pristine military dress whites, hands raised, surrounded by law enforcement. For some, it confirmed biases they barely acknowledged. For others, it triggered unease, a sense that something was deeply wrong. The officer's suspicion intensified rather than eased. Credentials were questioned. Explanations were dismissed. Elijah felt the humiliation creep in. Not loud, not explosive, but slow and suffocating. He had commanded sailors. He had overseen critical operations. He had represented the United States in international settings. Yet here, in a small-town gas station, his legitimacy was being stripped away piece by piece. As additional patrol cars arrived, the imbalance of power became undeniable. The flashing lights reflected off Elijah's uniform, creating a cruel contrast between honor and accusation. His heart rate increased, not from panic, but from the gravity of the situation. He knew how this looked. He knew how quickly narratives could form. And he knew how rarely those narratives favored men who looked like him. The officer moved closer, his body language aggressive, his tone unmistakably authoritative. Elijah was instructed to kneel. The concrete was hot beneath him as his knees touched the ground. The moment burned itself into his memory. Not because of physical pain, but because of what it symbolized. Decades of service reduced to a posture of submission. The handcuffs clicked shut with a finality that echoed far beyond the gas station. The sound felt louder than it was, reverberating inside Elijah's chest. Around him, the world seemed to slow. The murmurs of bystanders blended into a dull hum. His vision narrowed, focused not on the officers, but on the sky above, clear, indifferent, unchanged. Inside Elijah's mind, thoughts collided. He thought of his family, of younger sailors who looked up to him, of the lessons he had taught about integrity and resilience. He thought of the oath he had sworn, the sacrifices he had made, and he thought, with painful clarity, about how fragile respect could be when filtered through prejudice. The officers proceeded with the arrest, their actions procedural yet heavy-handed. Elijah offered no resistance. Resistance was not an option. Survival required restraint. Each step toward the patrol car felt like a public stripping of identity, a reminder that, uniform or not, his blackness preceded him in the eyes of authority. What the officers did not realize was that the moment had already transcended their control. Calls were being made. Footage was spreading. And within institutional channels far removed from the gas station, alarms were quietly sounding. The Pentagon, a place where Elijah's name was known and respected, was beginning to pay attention. At a nearby military installation, routine operations were interrupted by reports that seemed almost unbelievable. A senior Navy officer detained under questionable circumstances. The details were unclear, but the implications were not. Protocols were activated. Verification processes began. Commanders demanded answers. Back at the gas station, Elijah sat restrained in the patrol car, his posture still dignified despite the circumstances. He refused to let despair take root. He reminded himself that truth, while delayed, had a way of surfacing. Still, the emotional toll was undeniable. The weight of humiliation pressed against years of carefully maintained composure. The officers continued their procedures, confident in their authority, unaware that the situation was rapidly slipping beyond their jurisdiction. The town's quiet routine had been shattered, replaced by a moment that would soon draw national attention. And as minutes passed, the power dynamic began to shift, slowly at first, then unmistakably. Phones rang in offices far away. Names were checked, records confirmed. The narrative the officers believed they controlled was unraveling thread by thread. The turning point arrived without fanfare, but its impact was seismic. A senior official contacted the local department, his voice calm but unyielding. Questions were asked that demanded immediate answers. The atmosphere at the gas station changed palpably. Confidence drained from the officer's posture as uncertainty crept in. Verification confirmed what Elijah had known all along. His rank, his service, his authority. Everything the officers had dismissed was now undeniable. The realization hit hard. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a failure, systemic, profound, and exposed. The handcuffs were removed, but the damage lingered. Elijah stood slowly, his movement controlled, his expression composed. He did not gloat. He did not lash out. His silence spoke volumes. Around him, officers avoided eye contact. The crowd sensed a shift, murmurs growing louder, more pointed. The Pentagon's involvement was swift and unmistakable. Statements were prepared, investigations announced. The local department found itself under scrutiny it had never anticipated. What had begun as a routine stop was now a national reckoning. Elijah felt a complex surge of emotions, vindication tangled with exhaustion, relief shadowed by anger. He had been proven right, yet the cost of being right was steep. The uniform he wore had eventually protected him, but only after he had been humiliated in it. As he departed the gas station, escorted not as a suspect, but as an officer deserving respect, the weight of the moment settled in. He knew this was bigger than him, bigger than the town, bigger than one arrest. This was about a pattern, a truth many preferred to ignore. The footage would circulate. The debates would rage. And Elijah's image, hands raised in dress whites, would become a symbol, not of wrongdoing, but of resilience in the face of injustice. In the days that followed, the story spread rapidly. News outlets dissected every frame. Analysts debated policy. Social media erupted with outrage and reflection. For many, Elijah's experience confirmed fears long held. For others, it was an awakening. Official investigations led to consequences. Policies were reviewed. Training protocols questioned. Statements of accountability were issued. Though for Elijah, words felt insufficient. The emotional scars remained, etched deep beneath his composure. Elijah returned to duty, carrying the incident with quiet resolve. He spoke when asked, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He framed the experience not as a personal grievance, but as evidence of a system in need of change. His leadership, tested in unexpected ways, only grew stronger. The impact rippled outward. Conversations began in households, classrooms, and offices. The image of a black officer in chains challenged narratives and forced uncomfortable questions. Who is presumed guilty? Who is afforded dignity? And why does proof of service sometimes come too late? Elijah's story became part of a larger movement demanding accountability and empathy. It reminded the nation that racism does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes it hides behind procedure. And sometimes it reveals itself in moments that cannot be ignored. In the end, Elijah stood not as a victim, but as a testament to resilience. His experience underscored a painful truth. Justice delayed is not justice denied. It is justice questioned. Yet it also offered hope. Hope that exposure leads to change. Hope that stories told honestly can shift perspectives. As this story closes, remember that behind every headline is a human being. Behind every uniform is a story. And behind every act of injustice is an opportunity for reflection and reform. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think, please share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Stories, where truth is spoken, history is honored, and voices that matter are never silenced.